Welcome back to the Real Human Project. I'm Leora, one of the founders of Real Human. This is our public podcast. It's where we shine a light on some of the real human stories recorded by our members. Our project is open to everyone, so please go to realhuman.io to record your episode. Today we meet Joy Sybesma. From her childhood drawings to her career, Joy is obviously interested in human stories. Maybe that's why she tells hers so beautifully. Joy lived in 22 homes by the time she was 21, and I think that's made her highly adaptable. She deeply believes in learning through discomfort, in taking risks, and seems far more wary of complacency than change, which I think is very rare. Maybe that's why she was able to accept a nudge from an early manager of hers to switch to a job that would light her up instead of stress her out, and why she was able to leave her beloved New York City and her apartment during the pandemic and end up never going back. Joy speaks with beauty and wisdom about being a mother, a founder, a sister, a daughter, a friend. There's so much life in this short episode. I really hope you enjoy it as much as I did. Now I'll hand it over to our AI-powered host, Sam, and the interview with Joy Sybesma.
Can you tell me about the home and neighborhood you grew up in?
I moved around a lot as a kid. I think I lived in 22 homes by the time I was 21 years old. And that was largely because we relocated as a family, but also we moved a lot to renovate homes. We moved because of divorce and remarriages. There were a lot of reasons for moving around. But the majority of my life, I grew up in Minneapolis, Minnesota, and the suburbs of Minneapolis. And a couple of key things about the homes and the neighborhoods. One was we didn't really have any money growing up, and money was a huge element of stress in our lives. Up until third grade, we had lived in, let's call it nice suburbs of Minneapolis. In third grade, my dad lost his job and started down the path of actually getting diagnosed with bipolar disorder, and also started struggling a lot with alcohol. And that was a turning point because money became front and center of something that we didn't have. And therefore, it caused us to have to move out of the suburbs into the inner city of Minneapolis and went to private school. So we didn't, go to school in the inner city. And starting at about fourth grade, we're asked to do janitor work and other volunteer work at the school in order to pay our way for tuition. So it was interesting to spend a lot of time living in the inner city, but not having any community there and not having any friends there. My mom eventually and dad got divorced in seventh grade, and my mom quickly remarried someone who had a lot of money. And we moved back to the suburbs, but not without me taking a year and going and living with my dad. And I think I did that because I was angry at my mom. I was angry at her for divorcing my dad. I was angry at her for remarrying within a year of divorcing him. And I didn't think it was the right decision. And to punish her, I moved in with my dad. And my dad was in AA at the time, so he was clean. We lived in a pretty crappy apartment in Minneapolis. And I really felt valued during that time because I took care of my dad. I just remember it being a really challenging time, but also a time of joyfulness because my dad and I had quality time and he was sober. But it was a really challenging time with my mom because I had basically abandoned her and my little sister and moved out in ninth grade. Eventually, they bought a house in a nice suburb of Minneapolis, my mom and stepdad. I moved in with them after about a year, and I went to what was at the time the number one public high school in Minnesota. And the neighborhood there, it just was so forming because it was the first time in my life where I was around kids with a lot of privilege, but also with very involved parents who had high expectations of them. And I remember feeling like, wow, it's cool to be smart. It's cool to try hard. And I really became a creature of my environment by being in this, this public school that had a lot of funding and had people who were invested and people who cared. I think, bloomed in that environment. And I tell you all this because I've never really felt like I belonged in any of the neighborhoods that I grew up in. And so as a result, though, I think I've become somewhat of a chameleon. I can kind of figure out the environment that I'm in and adapt and make it my own. But as an adult, it's been a really interesting challenge to figure out where to lay down roots, where to live, where to raise my family, because there isn't necessarily an obvious choice.
Wow, Joy. Your journey through different homes and neighborhoods is really fascinating. Moving around a lot can shape a person in unique ways. Now, did you have siblings growing up? Were they older or younger than you?
Yes, I have 2 sisters. I'm the middle child. My older sister is 6 years older. She's technically my half sister, but my dad really raised her as if, she was his biological daughter. And my younger sister is my full sister, and she's 3 years younger than me. And being the middle child is everything that people say it is. I'm the peacemaker, I'm the harmonizer. My sisters and I are all very different, and we go through different stages of life of being incredibly close, inseparable, to having a little bit more distance. But I think as adults, we've figured out what makes us unique and have an amazing relationship.
It's wonderful to hear that you have a special relationship with your sisters, Joy. Moving on to the next question. What was one of your passions when you were young? Why was it so important to you?
My number one passion as a child was drawing, and it wasn't just drawing anything. I specifically drew girls in pretty clothes, friends, and families. I loved to not only create the clothes that they were wearing, but really their whole personality and even sometimes like the backstory behind them. And I realized over the years that the passion was actually much more about people and stories than it was just about drawing.
It's clear that drawing and creating stories through your art brought you a lot of joy, Joy. What did you decide to do after high school? And why was this a good fit for you at the time?
I believed because I love to draw so much that I should be a fashion designer. I got into the Fashion Institute of Technology in New York City, and I moved to New York as a 17-year-old and decided quickly that fashion design was not going to be an area that I would be able to support myself. And so I moved into fashion merchandising pretty quickly. And a couple of things happened that first year at the Fashion Institute of Technology. It was September 11th, 2001. I had been in New York City for, I think, exactly 1 week when 9/11 happened. That event caused me to reevaluate a lot of things. I remember going home for a period of time and really thinking I was going to drop out of college. And I remember my mom really giving me this pep talk like, imagine it's 15 years from now and you're at dinner with friends and everybody's talking about the college they graduated from and you don't have anything to say because you didn't graduate. And, well, it might be a little bit of an intense, kind of shameful way to put it. It worked for me. I went back to FIT and finished out my freshman year, but then I decided to transfer to the University of Minnesota to be closer to home. I stayed in the track of fashion merchandising at this new school, and I think it was the right decision for me at the time. But what was amazing is I met these friends that first year of college in New York that are still some of my best friends to this day. I think when you go through something so pivotal like 9/11, it really, makes people bonded. And so even though I moved to Minnesota, I didn't know it at the time. I felt it in my gut. I didn't know it at the time that I would be back to New York. And in 2008, I moved back to New York and was able to, kind of fold back into my group there and retain those friendships. So even though I started on this track of fashion, I kept that track throughout college, but pretty quickly pivoted once I got into the working world.
Why don't you tell me, how did you discover your passion for your profession?
So I started working right after college for what was then called Marshall Fields, a department store that eventually became Macy's. And I got what was, I thought, my dream job. I was an assistant buyer at Marshall Fields in the dresses department. The reality was, my job as an assistant buyer was mostly building spreadsheets in Excel. And something to know about me is that I struggled with math tremendously throughout my entire life. So then to find myself in a job where math and spreadsheets were core requirements of the role, it was incredibly challenging for me. So all the assistant buyers would come into the office on Monday mornings run our reports and then format them in Excel. And in those days, print off these massive, decks of spreadsheets for our bosses to go into their Monday meetings and recap how business was with the executives. Well, this whole process took hours and hours, especially for me, who is not great at math and slow at Excel. So I realized that these reports would batch on Sunday nights. So I could go into the office and actually run my reports and get a leg up on everybody else. And I remember one day my boss pulled me aside and she said, "Hey, Joy, I know you've been coming in on Sundays and running your reports." And I was so excited that she noticed, she was going to give me feedback and positive reinforcement about my work ethic. But instead, she said, "Well, I appreciate the effort. It shouldn't be this hard." And I was really caught off guard. And she said, "Joy, this job is numbers. This job is numbers stress, and that stress doesn't go away. And I'm just worried that this might not be the type of stress that motivates you." And she said, "On the flip side, every Monday morning, I see a line of people at your desk wanting to talk to you about their weekends and about their jobs and about their problems and their bosses. And you seem so lit up when you're dealing with people stress. And I'm wondering if we maybe should talk about a better job for you at this company." Pretty quickly, I interviewed and got hired in the learning and development department at Marshall Fields of what was quickly to become Macy's. And that set off my career in learning and development and talent and in HR. And so I really just am so grateful to that first boss who gave me that feedback, who saw me in that way and really helped orient me towards where my strengths were.
That's such a transformative journey, Joy. Switching gears, what's the best piece of advice you've ever been given? And who gave you that advice?
First one is the second you're comfortable, it's time to make a move. I feel like career-wise, especially, I haven't stayed long enough to get complacent. And I think as a result of that, I've taken risks. I got opportunities probably earlier in my career than a lot of people would have. And I learned much more quickly than probably somebody who was on a more steady track. Another one that I love is you have to stay inspired to be inspiring. Needing to actually reprioritize finding inspiration and staying inspired. Another good reminder for me. These 2 quotes have been really important advice for me in my career, are actually kind of coming full circle, so I'm glad that this question came up.
Now, how has your life turned out differently than you expected it to?
Much like many people, who were living in a city during the outbreak of COVID, we were living in a two-bedroom apartment in Manhattan with our 2 kids, and all of a sudden, we're working from home, and we decided to leave town, go to our cabin in Pennsylvania, and hunker down there for a while. Well, what we didn't know at the time was that we would never go back to that apartment. Our lease was coming up a couple of months later. We ended up deciding to give up the apartment. And I had lived in New York City for, let's see, 12 years that time around, a year before that in 2001. So 13 years of my life, longer than I'd ever lived anywhere. And out of nowhere, that life was over. And it was a really hard chapter. One, feeling very grateful to have another place to go and having nature and the outdoors for my kids, to be more free during COVID and during the lockdown. And for us, we had kind of this newfound freedom of I started my business during COVID. So we decided to take a leap and actually sell our cabin in Pennsylvania and go have an adventure. And we moved somewhere totally random. We moved to Isle of Palms, South Carolina. And we thought it would be just a year of fun and sun and the beach and kind of a reset for our family. And we're now 2.5 years in. And I think it's really changed my perspective on what I want my life to look like with my family and my kids. I have more quality time with them here. We're together, we're outside a lot. We're just, enjoying life as a family. And I think if I imagined my life as a mom, a working mom, I would have pictured myself in an office in a skyscraper in New York City in a, bougie apartment with a huge closet with lots of high heels. And instead, I'm running my own business. I'm living on a beach town and I wear flip-flops most days. So life has changed so dramatically from what I thought it would be. But that's like the fun of life, isn't it?
Can you tell me about a time you got really, really lucky?
I will say just motherhood in general, I have been so fortunate and so lucky. I got pregnant easily. I have 2 healthy baby girls. I did have 1 miscarriage in between, which was hard, but at the same time, if I'm being honest, I wasn't really ready to have a second baby yet. And I have been incredibly fortunate with, despite a few little things and some scares along the way, that my girls are healthy and happy. And I feel very lucky that it's gone the way it's gone.
That's wonderful, Joy. Being a mother and having healthy children is truly a blessing. What have I not asked you about today that I should have? Once you tell me, feel free to go ahead and answer that question.
Professionally, there's been a few examples of things that have happened to me in my professional life that really shaped who I am and helped me get in alignment with who I am and what I wanted. And there were a few experiences where I actually was very out of alignment professionally. And it was in my most senior positions in HR where I felt a little bit like I had to be a different person or a different version of myself in order to be successful. And that's really when burnout happens. And in hindsight, I'm so glad I had some of those experiences, even though they were really hard in the moment, because they helped me have the courage to take the leap to start my own business and to really start to focus and hone in on where my strengths are. And so I think a lot of people avoid pain and avoid suffering and challenge professionally and, abandon ship when it's too hard. And I just think that staying in the hard was really important for me to shape who I am and to help me then get into the true calling for my life. And so that's just things I would encourage others to do in their careers is pay attention to the hard. And remember that quote, the second you're comfortable, it's time to make a move, not the second you're uncomfortable. When you're uncomfortable, we learn a lot and we can lean into that discomfort. I sure learned a lot through those uncomfortable years.
Thank you so much for being on the show today, Joy. And to the listeners, I'd like to tell you about one of the really cool ways people are using the Real Human Project. It's companies. We've created podcasts just like this for Google, the Cleveland Clinic, Weight Watchers, Paramount Plus, and more. The difference is that these podcasts are private. Only employees can listen. So each episode features a different employee sharing their life experiences and reflections, just like Joy's, but it's someone that you work with. The companies we work with love having a new way to bring their people together, especially with so many coworkers remote. Our private podcasts are a really easy and lovely way to add more trust, empathy, and connection to the workplace, which not only improves employee productivity, but their happiness too. If you're looking to introduce a little human connection into your organization, please visit realhuman.io.